Hello and welcome back to coverage here at GP Richmond. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Reed Duke, and we're ready for round number 12, where we have our last undefeated player, Oliver 2, playing blue-white control. He's against Joel Sadowski on Esper control, who's only picked up one loss for the duration of the tournament. If you recognize Joel's name, it's because he played for the U.S. team at the World Magic Cup back in 2015 with Neil Oliver and Tom Martell.
So I just gave you a quick anecdote about Oliver's prowess in these control mirrors from 2 weeks ago at Grand Prix Providence, and that's exactly what we're going to see here against Joel Sadowski in his Esper control deck. So not too much is going to happen in the early turns, but what I want you to focus on is Oliver's pace of play, the speed of his physical motions, playing a land, passing each turn, and also his patience. You know, he's going to be very hesitant to tap mana on his own turn. He's going to focus more on making his land drops and waiting for potentially Joel to force the action.
And he does say land go here. That's going to open the door for Sadowski to play a Glimmer of Genius of his own. So the players with very similar starts, not missing land drops thus far, and playing Glimmer.
So Control Mirror is much different from what you might see out of other decks in Standard, the red decks, the green decks, for example. The setup stage of this matchup is going to go on for a very, very long time, and then the actual explosive action part will come much later and could be either close or decisive, depending on if one player is able to sculpt a better hand, amass a mana advantage, depending on how that setup phase does go.
See a little fight here early. Joel Sadowski went for Search for Azcanta, but Oliver had the answer, Forsake the Worldly. Exiles it right away, so it's gone. In the meantime, it's Lango, Lango, Lango. And Oliver is now, looks like he's considering the option of perhaps running out one of the two copies of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, that he has in his hand. He would have 3 mana available in surplus. Also, he's got one to give. He's just staring at a Settle the Wreckage and such, and that isn't really going to get the job done here.
Yeah, that's right. Oliver's going to take stock of the context of his hand and the strength or weakness thereof. And I think if he's holding strong, if he has a lot of counter spells and more land drops ready to go, he's going to be more likely to be conservative, where if he just looks and says, boy, my hand stinks, it's all Settle the Wreckages and cards that aren't effective in the control mirror, that will make him more likely to take a chance on casting a Teferi. Here, it looks like he's holding 8, so he's going to either have to take an action or discard to hand size, which is not terribly appealing.
Right, that's exactly what happened to Joel, though, at the end of his turn. He ended up discarding a cast down to hand size himself. So a little bit of a stumble here from both of our players after they've kind of marched their way up to 8 lands on the battlefield. And it looks like Oliver's like, well, I've got 3 copies of Teferi now. I'm just going to go ahead and run one out. I believe he can protect it with a counterspell, maybe a Disallow. But he's not going to fight here. He doesn't want to leave the shields down, and this is a common play pattern for control mirrors, Reed. The first person to actually try to do something, if it doesn't work out and they end up having to pass the turn back to their opponent, it can get really ugly. But you can see that Joel Sadowski was at the ready. Oliver said, disallow your Teferi, but negate in hand for Joel Sadowski allows him to land this critical planeswalker and source of card advantage going forward.
You said it exactly right, Marshall. It's often the second player to play their powerful spell that's going to have the advantage, because there Joel Sadowski was able to fight the fight on his terms when Oliver had a lower amount of mana available to him, and he's the one who gets Teferi into play, though Oliver follows it up nicely with his own.
That's right, and of course in a Teferi fight, you can go ahead and send one of those Teferi's pack, and it's going to be a couple cards down from the top of the library now from Joel. And even though Oliver lost that initial duel, he's the one that ends up with Teferi on the battlefield, though I spoke a little too soon because Joel Sadowski did have the answer this time.
Let's talk about that card, Marshall, Vraska's Contempt, because that is the #1 difference between the two decks that we're seeing right now. The white-blue control deck, Oliver 2 naturally does not have access to Vraska's Contempt, but Joel Sadowski does. So the pattern I think that Joel wants to get into is answering the Teferis with Vraska's Contempts and leaving his precious counterspells for other fights later on down the road. And the other nice thing about that is it permanently exiles Teferi. So if we see the game go long enough for commit memory to be a major player, then Oliver's deck is going to be diluted of some of his best cards after everything gets reshuffled.
We did see a fight there on end step, or actually with the trigger on the stack, I believe, from Teferi. Joel Sadowski said, I'm going to do what Reed says. I'm going to cast Vraska's Contempt. But Oliver, too, had Syncopate and was able to keep his Teferi on the battlefield with 3 lands as he's passed the turn back to Joel. So we're already at a pretty critical juncture here.
There it is, Marshall. Commit memory on your screen. That's a really important card in any slow matchup, but in the control mirror in particular. And I want everyone to tilt their head to the right so they can read the memory part, because that's the part I'm talking about. Each player reshuffles their graveyard and hand into their library. And setting up to take advantage of that card is important, and it's why Syncopate and Vraska's Contempt, that little extra point of text of exiling the card, actually can matter quite a lot. So here, flurry of action, players fighting over Teferis. Oliver going to respond with Glimmer of Genius so he can decide if he wants to fight a counter battle, maybe answer it with a cast out.
Cast out it is. Oh, but look at this. Forsake the Worldly from Joel.
Oh, and getting punished here because
Jeez.
That cast out came in response to the Teferi activation, but then Teferi was exiled and brought back onto the battlefield to be activated yet again. Really nice turn for Joel Sadowski.
Right. Double activation means 2 cards, but also he has 5 mana available now as he passes the turn back because he got to untap 4 lands.
And you see the evolution, the perfection of these control decks over the course of the long standard season. Both players with main deck, 1 copy of Forsake the Worldly. That's just really nice tech. The players have identified that as being enough of a versatile card in enough matchups that it's worth the slot, but a low enough cost when it's bad due to the cycling. And both players having put that to great use so far in Game 1 of this control mirror, answering Search for Ascanta and Cast Out, respectively.
Of course, I mean, this game would look so much different if Joel Sadowski had kept that Search for Ascanta and had transformed it. Now he would have been in easy mode. So Forsake really doing work for both players. Meanwhile, Teferi getting a little scary here. Teferi's up to 7 loyalty.
And while it wasn't exactly easy mode, Joel has navigated himself to a winning position here, up way ahead on resources. And Oliver, with a handful of creature removal and Essence Scatters, it seems, he really desperately needs to find Teferi or Cast Out if he's going to answer this, because he's not beaten the Emblem, although he can disallow it.
Now, here's a Torrential Gearhulk for Sadowski, but Oliver's been sitting on multiple copies of Essence Scatter for the whole game. So he's going to deploy one of those right now. But, like, Sadowski's now in his main phase with the Planeswalker on Ultimate, and he's going for it. So how in the world is Oliver supposed to come back now?
Well, he has to disallow. Does he not have disallow?
Nope. And now we're going to see the standard issue play, which is replay a second Teferi after Ultimate in the first. But now you've got the emblem, so the plus ability is exile target permanent, draw a card, untap 2 lands at the beginning of your end step. And that's got to be that, right? I mean, there's no way Oliver can
if I'm Oliver, I'm maybe taking my next draw step and then scooping up to save some time.
Yeah, Joel did what his deck was designed to do, which is Ultimate Teferi. And here come the draw steps flowing now. Draw a card for the turn, exile a land. Cycle a land, exile a land. Draw with Teferi, exile a land. Go. Are we done? Oliver's still looking at his hand. Maybe he has some way. He does have a ton of lands available. He plays Search for Ascanta. But Joel's like, sure, I'll just kill it. Oh boy, there's Glimmer of Genius. That's got to do it, right?
Yeah, I don't know why Oliver's continuing to play. He might have some plan that I'm not thinking of, but this looks like it's in the death throes to me.
Normally you'd think, well, maybe he's just looking for for maybe what Joel's win con is, but it's kind of on the battlefield already, right?
Yeah, a lot of times you'll see in the late game, the Teferi player will just exile all of the opponent's permanents and then start burying their own Teferi to make sure that they don't get decked. And against an opponent that can never put more than one land onto the battlefield, you can just exhaust their library one turn at a time. So it's a slow way to do it, but if eventually the players see the writing on the wall, and usually it draws a concession or the game starts going at a lightning fast pace.
I was going to say, perhaps a little hint as to Oliver's game plan. He actually took a look at Joel Sadowski's size of library there, but then he scooped him up after that. So we're done. Game number 1 goes to Joel. Big smile on his face. He must have said something funny because Oliver smiled at him too.
So Joel Sadowski loves that outcome, but actually for Oliver too, it's probably the second best outcome for game 1. The best would have been him winning, but the second best is to lose quickly so that you have plenty of time to win 2 sideboarded games, because I'll tell you, the round clock is certainly a concern in a matchup like this.
We're pretty lucky this round, aren't we, Reed? Both of these players playing very quickly.
Yep.
You know, I mean, what turn was that? 20-something? 30? I mean, you know, that game went actually very long, but since so much of it was land go, the players were just land go, 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 and you can tell that they've both played this matchup a lot as well. One thing you can look for that is if you watch Oliver, he just went to his sideboard and just started pulling stuff out or pulling stuff out of his main deck right away because he knows there's a whole bunch of cards that he really doesn't want. Sadowski's going to have the same situation. You know, we saw him pitching cast out to hand size as well as fatal push. Cards like that he just didn't have any interest in.
One thing that's cool, which Oliver does post-sideboard in these control mirrors and a lot of other players don't, is he brings in creatures. Stuff like Walking Ballista. I see that he has access to History of Benalia if he wants to turn to that card. But 3 Walking Ballistas that I saw him bring in quite a lot at Grand Prix Providence. And that's sort of an unassuming card. You don't think of it as an anti-control card, but it does a lot, particularly in a post-sideboard game where you know the Esper control player is not going to be leaving in too much removal. It can pressure Planeswalkers. It can answer whatever techie sideboard card your opponent might have, like Glint Sleeve Siphoner. And actually in games that go long and you have a lot of mana to pump into it, it can just threaten the opponent's life total as well. But Joel has a sweet one. One of the rewards of going into the Esper color combination, Chromium the Mutable.
Oh, sure.
Control Mirror Killer right there. Uncounterable, flash, resilient to removal spells.
Yeah, we have seen Chromium do serious work in these control mirrors. Does he just have one, or?
Just one.
I think I have a real hard time with that. Yeah, that's fine. I was off it. Sounds good.
Oliver, too, of course, came up through the online ranks, similar to you, Reed, in that people knew who he was before he actually played at a GP or a Pro Tour. Two-Tang Clan was his name.
It's really good.
He's a big fan of hip-hop as well, just in general, so it fits his preferences. Yeah, Oliver's in school right now. And kind of interesting. He still manages to do very well at Magic.
Taking us to school along the way.
Indeed. Maybe he's on his summer break and just no classes, crush everybody, then go back to work at school. Interestingly, Oliver's going to cycle a land here. You know, those land drops are very important. And Joel says, well, I can do that too, I guess. Irrigated farmland hitting the graveyard on a cycle.
Yeah, in general, in the early setup stage of a control mirror, I'm pretty hesitant to cycle a land because the first player who misses a land drop in that slow holding pattern is at a big disadvantage. So I generally like to see the way my hand and the game is developing a little bit before I pull the trigger on deciding whether or not to cycle. And actually here you see Oliver might be a little bit stuck. He has a very reactive hand where he doesn't have land drops, but also doesn't have much ways to force the action.
It's a little awkward because he actually ended up cycling Forsake and then another irrigated farmland. Now, he did hit his land drop for this turn, but boy, the prospect of tapping mana here is pretty scary because Joel could just untap and play a Teferi, and then your world's really in pain. Now, although Oliver's in a position where if he doesn't draw a land off the top of his library, he's going to start missing land drops. A little awkward. And he missed.
Well, it's not an emergency because
So
Joel's not forcing the issue. I think, I don't know. I think both of these players were a little too hasty in cycling, but the game does remain even. Oliver hit his land drop there, and now Joel might be forced to take an action or discard to hand size.
He's going to take an action, all right. Search for Escanta goes on the stack. Oliver's staring down at a disallow, though. With his particular mana configuration, he can only play one of those, even though he has 6 mana. He's going to fire it off here. Sadowski has to make a big decision on if he really wants to fight, because he's going to have the shields down if he does so, and then he could be the one facing down Teferi. And neither player really wants to leave that door open, so Joel just says, yeah, sure. Looks like Oliver would like a little bit more on the blue mana end of things, so he's going to use Field of Ruin. That would also take Joel off of black mana if he doesn't get a swamp, so he's kind of compelled to do so. Leaves him with just one white source and one black source currently.
Ballista for 1. That's a way to force the action.
Look at this post board. Joel Sadowski at least kept one fatal push in, and he's going to fire it off right now. A little surprised to see that in post board.
Yeah, that's some nice sideboarding leveling there. Certainly the default move would be to take them all out, but if Joel knows that Oliver knows that and might come prepared with creatures, who knows, Joel Sadowski may have even studied Oliver's list from the previous Grand Prix. So I think he's just making that decision against the particular opponent that he's facing across the table from him today.
Pretty awkward here for Joel. He went to pass the turn, realized he had 8 cards, discarded Vraska's Contempt. Now on Oliver's end step, he's going to fire off Glimmer, but I mean, he's on 7 cards going down to 6. Back up to 8 plus a draw step. But even then, Oliver's like, nah, I think I'd prefer you to not hit your land drops. I'm going to counter it.
And that is the thought process, right? Is do I try to stick my opponent with no lands, or do I capitalize on them discarding to hand size?
Yeah, because this is really building up towards a turn where Oliver's going to be able to capitalize on having a pretty significant mana advantage at this point. Although it looks like we may see Syncopate. No, I was wrong. Torrential Gearhulk now from Oliver, too. So he's looking to make a big stand. And he's going to force the issue. That's disallow from Sadowski. Now, if Oliver does have a Syncopate, though. No, it's Jace's defeat, but close enough. Now he gets to use a counterspell out of the graveyard and bang, start hitting for 5 damage. And the ball is very much in Joel Sadowski's court, especially because Oliver was able to resolve this on Joel's turn. Now he has all of his mana up to protect the Gearhulk. And it's desperation time for Sadowski. He just has to run out to Teferi. Hard to imagine that that's going to resolve here, though. Yeah, Syncopate from Oliver, too. He only has to pay 2 mana there to counter it, and bang, there goes another quarter of your life total. You're down to 10, Joel.
Still 3.
Oliver looking to use this this Gearhulk to the maximum. Looks like we have Joel actually at 4 rather than 5.
From the one walking ballista ping.
Thank you. All right, either way, it doesn't change the clock, and Oliver, too, finds his way to victory here in game number 2.
All right, Marshall. Well,
Got a game 3?
It's the mirror image of what I said a moment ago. That was the very best outcome for Oliver, too, and the second best outcome for Joel Sadowski, as both players have got to feel really lucky that they are in a position where they have plenty of time to play game 3, and this match has a great chance of reaching its natural conclusion.
I've gotten the vibe that, both players from the very get-go had a keen understanding and a real presence about that, right?
I would definitely agree.
Yeah, and I really like to see that because I've covered a lot of matches, and I've definitely seen it where the players play kind of normal speed or even a little slowly and kind of carries along for a while, and then they go, wait, what? We've still got to do 2 more games, and we've got 19 minutes left on the clock, and then they start playing super fast and maybe even a little too fast for their own good, where they're missing things or not playing their absolute best. I like to see this where the players were clearly aware of the clock from the very first turn of the game and have respected that throughout the whole way, because like you said, now we're going to come in at 26 minutes left, and we're going to be able to finish this game most likely in a pretty consistent manner. So good for them. Smart, both of them.
You could be the absolute best player in the world, but if you don't play quickly enough and choose a deck like White, Blue, or Esper Control, you're not going to win Grand Prix, particularly not the large, challenging ones where you have to go 13-2, because a draw, it's just as good as a loss. So, no matter how far ahead you are, how much you feel like you had a great chance of winning Game 3, if you run out of time, you're done. It can end your tournament.
Maybe you could give us, while they're finishing shuffling here, Reed, just a snapshot of what top 8 looks like for these two, because we're already in round number 12, 3 more rounds after this. I mean, Oliver hasn't lost yet at all.
Yeah, Oliver is in an amazing position, and as much as I've been talking about finishing the match in time, a draw would not be terrible for him, because 11-0 with really strong tiebreakers, we can expect him to probably make top 8 at 12-2-1 or 12-1-2, something like that. So he's got to get his 12th win somewhere along the way, but that's it. I mean, that's all it takes, and one draw in addition to that. So Oliver in really, really good position. Joel, if he wins this match, in amazing position, but he needs 2 more wins in the remaining 4.
Okay. All right, well, we're underway here, and a good start here for Sadowski. Glint Sleeve Siphoner. This can be really annoying for Oliver, too, as it's a annoying source of damage, but perhaps more importantly, extra cards.
That's right. We saw it come down on turn 2 in game 2, but when Oliver was on the play, he was ready with Essence Scatter. Now the equation is much different, as Joel's the one who's able to play his second land first and get the Siphoner in underneath Counterspell mana.
Very important. He's going to attack in. That's going to get him a second energy, and if that thing gets to survive until his turn, he'll start getting cards off of it, and that's a real problem for Oliver. Getting a threat underneath the counter magic means that life is just difficult for him. History of Benalia, though, was the play for Oliver, but Sadowski was all over it, slammed a negate on the table and said, no, sir, you may not have that. So both of them kind of going low.
This is just Joel Sadowski's game to win or lose at this point, though. He is in phenomenal position, already ahead on 1 card from the Glint Sleeve Siphoner trigger, but also that important pattern that we've discussed in the control mirror where he has the advantage on the board. It's up to Oliver to force the action, and Joel gets to fight on his terms every single turn, having his mana open, just sitting behind that Glint Sleeve Siphoner and letting it press his advantage.
Geez, Siphoner looks amazing here. Oh, and there's another one now for Sadowski. Interesting.
Very interesting.
I might have been inclined to just sit on this one, although it looks like that wouldn't have worked. So
it's kind of interesting because I feel like you either want to choose, am I going to fight two battles, one on whatever Oliver casts at the end of my turn and one on whatever he casts on his own turn, or do I want to do what Joel decided, which is to deploy a second threat so that I can just say, okay, your cast out's fine, that resolves, and keep my mana open. And it looks like it worked out beautifully for him, his decision.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Take the battle to Oliver and force him to react to you means that you don't have to fight one of those battles.
I think, given that he deployed the second Glint Sleeve Siphoner, he also would have let something like a Glimmer of Genius resolve if that had been Oliver's play. But boy, looks like Oliver in desperation mode here, cycling.
Joel suggesting to Oliver, are you sure you don't want to cast Forsake on this cast out? Oliver declining. And once again, we're passing the turn back to Sadowski with the energy to cash in a life and a card. And boy, oh boy, that has added up in a huge way. And let's not forget the damage. Oliver's down to 10 now, and it was all from a Siphoner.
These post-board games can get weird when players have a very small amount of removal. Even something like a 2-power creature can go all the way. You would never see it in game one, but here after sideboard, the decks are not necessarily as balanced. They're razor focused on winning these counterspell battles and resolving key card advantage cards. Sometimes there's a hole to exploit there.
This is interesting. They're having a full-on fight here over this Glint Sleeve Siphoner because Oliver said, I'd like to cast out. And Sadowski said negate, or excuse me, disallow. But Oliver had another counterspell with Jace's defeat. But ultimately, Sadowski won the counter fight with disallow, I should say. And he still has Glint Sleeve Siphoner, so now Oliver's down to 8 life. And there's another 2 energy bundle waiting for Joel on his upkeep here as well. So you said it earlier, Reed, this one was Joel's to lose. Sticking that turn 2 Siphoner has been an absolute game changer for this game. Here's Glimmer now.
So the best Oliver can hope for is that Joel draws the wrong types of cards. Things like Vraska's Contempt, that Fatal Push that he left in his deck, too many lands. And then if Oliver can remove the Siphoner and get back to even footing, then it's anybody's game. But
he can. I think he found a Walking Ballista here.
Sideboard tech,
yeah,
particularly for Glint Sleeve Siphoner.
Curious to see if Oliver would go for just the 1/1 Ballista just to get rid of it and leave up as much mana as possible, or if he would go for a bigger one and be able to try to keep it on the battlefield. And he answered my question. He's going for a 2/2.
And it resolves.
Wow, just like that, the Siphoner advantage gone, and Oliver's still at a relatively comfortable 8 life. Remember, this Esper control deck isn't going to kill you out of nowhere, although Chromiums can do something. All right, here's Fatal Push to finish off the Walking Ballista. But now Sadowski doesn't really have anything going on.
Yeah, Oliver might just be winning now.
Ooh, did we speak too soon? Here's a Glimmer of Genius. That could certainly fuel the fire for Sadowski. No, it's not going to resolve, though. Disallow from Oliver. Says, no, sir. Back over to Joel, and he just passes the turn back to Oliver.
Glimmer of Genius has an interesting role in this matchup, and that role changes quite a lot between main deck and sideboard. In main deck, it's a card that's part of that setup stage where you're really going to hit your land drops, try to stock your hand with another counterspell, and you often won't see players fight over Glimmer of Genius in the first game. But in game 2, when every single card matters and the fights run on thin margins and you're digging to more counterspells in action, it's a lot more likely to see what we just saw, which is players exchanging counterspells to make sure the opponent cannot resolve Glimmer of Genius.
Wow. But ultimately, Oliver tapped out here to win that counterfight, and he even found himself a torrential Gearhulk in that pile with the Glimmer.
Yeah, what happened in this game was Joel was able to get a noticeable advantage early from the Glint Sleeve Siphoner, but he just drew a few too many reactive cards. He's got a couple of Vraska's Contempts and that Fatal Push, which the Fatal Push just traded for half of a Walking Ballista after the damage was already done. So he didn't find the right cards that he needed to press his early advantage.
Oliver's going to resolve Teferi, activate it. Joel says, with that ability on the stack, I'd like to use one of these Vraska's Contempts. And Oliver says, okay. So he does get the card and the untap, but Teferi's exiled.
Yep.
Joel has a Torrential Gearhulk of his own, but he's going to hold on to it for now, it looks like.
Oliver also has, hiding in his land pile there, Memorial to Genius.
Okay. A couple
which
of cards.
he can cash in.
Yeah, that's exactly what he's going to do. More cards, please. But in the meantime, it's land go once again for Oliver 2. Draw go for Joel Sadowski. Just under 20 minutes left in the round, looking good. And Field of Ruin's going to hit something, though it didn't look like he was 100% clear what he wanted to
Eeny,
hit.
meeny, miny, mo. Boy, Oliver's hand is stacked now, resolving a couple glimmers at key moments.
He's going to go for Search for Azcanta. Man, these guys are playing fast. I kind of love it. There it is, Torrential Gearhulk for Sadowski, but Jace's defeat is going to counter it. That means, though, that Oliver 2 gets to have Search for Azcanta on the battlefield. He can transform it next turn. Another Glint Sleeve Siphoner, but Oliver doesn't look super concerned about that one.
No, he's well prepared with another Walking Ballista in hand.
Upkeep, take a look at the card. I'll keep that one, thank you very much. Ooh, just commit. And he's going to transform Azcanta the Sunken Ruin. There's that Ballista. That's Essence Scatter for Sadowski. Disallow back the other direction for Oliver 2. And he wins that counter fight as well. That's going to leave him with a 1-1 Walking Ballista and no Siphoner for Joel Sadowski, so his board is still empty. There's a second Torrential Gearhulk now, though, for Joel. He's going to go for Glimmer of Genius. He doesn't care about the Walking Ballista particularly.
Wow, this is a big play, Marshall. This
Yeah.
could get him right back in it.
Absolutely. He still has 3 mana untapped as well. He finds Vraska's Contempt.
Keep in mind, Oliver's still at 8 life from those early hits from Siphoner. The Torrential Gearhulk is a
Right.
very pressing threat.
Looks like I spoke too soon. He actually had Vraska's Contempt in his hand already, but he did find a copy of Teferi off of that Glimmer. And maybe Chromium?
Wow, that would be a game changer. And now we see a pattern that you sometimes get to towards the end of control mirrors where things degenerate into the players trying to make the most powerful play they can on their own turn.
Tap out, baby. Cyclo land. Only 3 mana left up for Oliver 2. Still just going to pass. If he does, it makes it a lot more likely that yes, he has Chromium. And now I can see it. He does. So Chromium has Flash and Flying and is a 7/7 that can't be countered, and even has the ability to protect itself. So commit, though, is an answer for Chromium, at least temporarily, as it's not actually countering it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that game plan going to work for Oliver, or is he still going to end up just having to face down Chromium in a couple of turns?
Good question. I'm not 100% sure the answer to that. Oliver has a big advantage on the board, so he could maybe just try to close the game. Alternatively, oh, wow, this is a nice play. He's going to use Field of Ruin, which forces the opponent to search their library, mandatory shuffle, so he may not have to face that Chromium again, at least not in a relevant time frame.
Yeah, and the time frame is growing short here for Joel Sadowski, as Oliver, too, has 6 power out right now to Joel's 11 life, but that 6 power can grow quite dramatically thanks to all the lands on the battlefield as well as Walking Ballista. So this is a big turn here for Sadowski. We know he has Teferi. Oh, he's got Vraska's Contempt, though, and he wants to fire it off on the Torrential Gearhulk. That would be a nice swing for him. He'd go back up to 13 life and drastically reduce the amount of pressure he's facing.
Curious to see if Oliver lets this go or picks a fight. There's 2 things to think about. First is, can I win if my Gearhulk goes away? Can I just find another route? But also, what can I spend my mana on instead? And he does have a convenient Search for Escanta activation if he decides to keep his 4 mana open.
Sadowski looks like he must have passed a turn back here, and that did prompt Oliver to go ahead and activate Search. Did he miss?
He missed.
What the? It's not supposed to happen, is it?
Every once in a while.
All right. Ballista gets in for 1, and here's History of Benalia now for Oliver, so some good damage output here. Joel's going to cycle land and then say, all right, the saga resolves. Another Fetid Pools cycled here for Sadowski, so he sees 2 fresh cards. I think they're grabbing the token here for Oliver. And there it is. Teferi is going to prompt an immediate counterspell in the form of Negate from Oliver, and just as quickly a Negate from Sadowski hits the battlefield. Or the stack, I should say. So, okay, Teferi, Syncopate. For 4, Sadowski only has 3 mana left, and he can't pay, and Syncopate is going to exile Teferi.
And this is getting bad for Joel. His life total is getting really low. He's behind on resources, so he needs a really, really big play next turn, but that's a tall order when Oliver has a couple cards in hand, the activation of Search for Escanta. Might have a lot to fight through.
Oh boy, another History of Benalia. And this is going to be quite a board state here for Oliver next turn. It is lethal. If all of those 3 knights that are on there now get pumped up from the first History of Benalia, Chapter 3, that'll close the book on Joel Sadowski if he can't find some way here. Oliver activates Search for Escanta, or I should say Escanta the Sunken Ruin, in response to a Teferi going on the stack, but he says sure. So he's going to prevent the maximum damage he can by putting that first History of Benalia.
That's a tough way to do it, Marshall.
Yeah, it really is. It does keep him alive, though. He's only taking 6 damage rather than lethal.
Well, it depends what Oliver decides to do with that Walking Ballista.
Yeah, he could just go for it and kill him, couldn't he? This would be lethal. That's 8 damage, and then he can just use the Ballista to finish him off, ignoring Teferi. And if Sadowski doesn't have anything, well, he does, but it gets countered. Vraska's Contempt on a Knight token's not where you wanted to be anyway, Joel Sadowski. And Oliver, too, wins yet again. He's 12-0 here in Richmond.
Yeah,
no signs of slowing.
Amazing job by Oliver. Going in, nice free there.
I like that.
But yeah, we can expect to see him in our top 8 at this point. He only needs to shake hands one of the last 3 rounds, and I think he's in.
Yeah, so fantastic work by Oliver, and he continues his dominance of the standard format, this time with his blue-white control deck. So we'll, of course, be keeping an eye on that and other storylines as they develop for us. We had an eye on Luis Salvato earlier in the day and other top players, Seth Manfield and such, near the top of the field. We are kind of cruising down the stretch here, of course, in Richmond. We're going to be bringing you coverage of the last 3 rounds plus the top 8 after that. But first, we're going to take a short commercial break. We'll see you after that.